Episode 684. Book Talk begins at 15 minutes and 15 seconds. Cranford begins with episode 679.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania.
Episode 684. Gaskell Shawls. This episode of CraftLit is brought to us by our lovely patrons, members, and supporters. This week, we would like to highlight Julie Mead, Cheryl N. Schmidt, Catherine Snyder, Terry J. Rao, and Kayleen Comfort. Thank you so much for your support. This would not be possible without you. Thank you. Well, hello, how are you? I actually feel like myself today. And that is only partially chemically induced. Although one of the chemicals that I'm using is tea. So I thought I would tell you which tea I am using today. It is Cinnamon Nourish Black, which has caffeine and is so yummy. Obviously, as a black tea, and a caffeinated tea, it's definitely a morning tea. I am having it just a little bit afternoon because along with allergies and things, my throat is always like, meh, not quite 100%. So I have a little tiny teapot that fits on top of the mug, and that keeps it warm, which I like. So I'm going to be refilling my tank as we go through today's chapters. And along with that being the tea, the reason I have that tea is because I went and selected, I've already gotten glue from one of the projects I was working on the case. I will just hide that part. I went ahead and got myself the literary tea collection, and it comes in a nice tin, and it comes with a strainer, and in it there is Reading Nook black tea, Bookshop blend white tea, Soul Warmer herbal tea, that's decaf, Buttery shortbread herbal tea, and Gratitude blend Earl Grey black tea, which, I'm looking forward to that. All of these work really well as iced teas too, which is not always true of hot tea, baggy kind of teas that you get at the store. So that made me very happy. Yeah, boy, I'm not kidding. My throat is just a mess. I'm sure you're all having trouble too, because pollen is, coming earlier and coming on stronger, which is, of course, confusing the bees and the butterflies. Ooh, I know. I had written down 2 videos to share with you. I actually have a third. So the first 2 videos that I had wanted to share, this is kind of my crafty bit because it's with gardening and I am still working on growing the garden. Parkrose Permaculture. She is a woman, a mother of 4. I think almost all of them are grown-up people at this point. But she has spent 20 years creating kind of a permaculture oasis around their house. They live on a 1/4 acre of land, and that includes the house. So 6 people in that space. But she has food items, fruit trees and things like that, but vegetables, also some really gorgeous flowers. But she's made kind of a food forest, which is a thing if you have the land or you have a landowner if you're renting and they will allow you to. It's really, there's a lot of support out there now. There did not used to be, trust me. But the reason that I bring her up, aside from the fact that what she does really is very crafty, She is smart, and she has done a lot of research over the years, and she's just as willing to tell you about the mistakes as she is the wins, and I always like that. She had a video on unintended consequences. When you try and solve one problem very quickly, but you don't take time to figure out the downstream effects of those solutions, bad things happen. And I was thinking that's something that in the maker space, especially kind of the soft maker space, the longer that you knit or crochet or paint or weave or spin, I think we learn over time that you can change stuff up on the fly. Oh, I made a mistake 7 rows back. I am not ripping this out. It'll be a design element and we'll just move on. That's usually fine. But I think we learn over time that sometimes there are mistakes that if you don't correct them, like go back and correct them, you can really make things much more difficult for yourself in the long run. It's kind of the measure twice, cut once thing. And I don't know. I feel like I don't think I knew that when I was younger. I don't think I was aware enough of possible repercussions. But after you've done something for a while, you do get to know those things. So I thought that was an interesting video. I also thought she did a really, really good one on rugged individualism. Now, this is probably not as big a thing outside of the United States, but boy, is it a big thing here. I remember when I was growing up, the president was always talking about, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's actually not that kind of Horatio Alger story thing. That was not supposed to be a positive. That was supposed to be something that when you heard it, you would go, well, that's ridiculous. I can't pull myself up by my own bootstraps because I'm standing. It's not pulling your boots on by their bootstraps. That would make sense. But to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, if you're not up already, you can't lift. You understand what I'm saying? So, hearing that a lot when I was a kid and having obviously read the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, it was easy for people to kind of put that on Laura Ingalls Wilder and say, no, 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 Pa was a rugged individualist and stuff. And yeah, I guess, kind of. But I went back and read the first 2 books a while ago, and they are constantly interacting with neighbors. It's not easy to get to them because, if you can see their smoke from their chimney, you're too close, according to Pa. But there was a lot of relying on others, not just your family, for help and support. And when they needed support, you stood up. And when you needed support, they stood up. And there's a book that I will put into the show notes. I think it's called Pioneer Women. And I know I've talked about it before. My mom actually found the copy that she read back then and that I have read since. And these are journals and stories and letters about and by pioneer women in the 1800s in the United States. And it's real clear in those stories, journals, diaries, letters that the women were not pretending to be rugged individualists. You rose and fell based on the strength of your community. And I thought, that's a really nice video compliment to Cranford. Because, boy, if this isn't it takes a village, I don't know what is. And I have also been thinking as we move forward into this brave new world, and I do mean that the way that it should be taken from the Aldous Huxley book. If you live somewhere where you don't know your neighbors, Heather, now's a really good time to introduce yourself to the people who live around you. Yeah, just make sure you know the people near you and they know you, and keep an eye on each other. The other, I guess there are two other videos. They're shorter and they're much more DIY tutorials. There's one for making a bee house and one for making a Ladybug Hotel. And I remember when I was walking through the part of Berlin that's near where my sister lives, we went on this lovely little walk, and people had these little, it was a whole community. People had these little patches of land with summer homes. And some of these homes didn't even have like real doors because you just, flopped on the floor or on a cot or something and spent summer evenings out there. You could sleep it. Some of them were definitely sleep worthy, but most of them were just like nice little places to go have a garden. If you live in an apartment, this was a place to have a garden and grow some of your own vegetables and grow some beautiful flowers. And it was a little cooler and more spread out and not so dense. And it was beautiful. But one of the things that I kept seeing over and over and over were these little houses, and they weren't bat houses and they weren't bird houses. They looked like houses, but they had little different sized tubes of wood all shoved in. So it looked like a post office box for gnomes who were sending a lot of rolled up scrolls to each other. It was just strange. And finally, I looked at my sister and said, "What? That what?" And she said, "Oh, those are bug houses." Because that's how you cultivate the good bugs that you need in your garden to help with pollinating and everything. And I learned there are several different kinds of bees that I didn't know anything about. There's the standard bumblebee, honeybee, sweat bees. I have no idea. I haven't looked them up. And solitary bees. Apparently, all of them will work as pollinators. Attracting any of them to hang out in your area is a good idea as long as you are not going to go into anaphylactic shock if one should happen to sting you. But yeah, the little bee and bug houses are kind of cool. And then the ladybug habitat or the Ladybug Hotel, you need to have a source of water. And I don't mean like a pond or a pool or a puddle or even like a saucer of water. You need to have, I took a little cap off of a soda bottle and I folded up a bunch of leftover paper and I soaked that so that in the evening when they are oot and boot, they can land there and drink some water without drowning. The other thing is they need calm, quiet, out of the wind, shady, warmer places to go at night. So if you roll up a bunch of toilet paper tubes or paper, something thick paper, cardboard paper, and you stick it into a paper towel tube, and then you drip some honey in there and set that down someplace out of the wind, that gives them a nice little hidey hole to go to. And I thought that was also a good idea because those are other buggies that we want to keep nearby. I am sure there are other things that one can do for butterflies aside from planting seeds for flowers that butterflies like that are not pre-treated with DDT or, well, not DDT anymore, but any kind of a anti-insect or insecticidal kind of thing. You don't want the seeds that have been pre-treated with nasty stuff that will kill the butterflies and the bees. So yeah, I learned a lot this week about that, and I thought you might be interested too. And don't forget what we learned from our fabulous North and South reader, Barbara Edelman, in her podcast that she did back then, which I think was called What You Could Do to Save the World. She always asked the people at the end, okay, we've learned all the things that are problematic and difficult and challenging. What is something that our listeners can do? One simple thing. And that was it. It was plant flowers, no matter where you are, especially in rural environments. And I'll tell you why in a sec. Rural environments, plan non-pre-treated flowering seeds that the buggies like, the butterflies, the bees, all the pollinators. Why, especially in rural areas? Because it turns out that the flowers that have been planted in the urban environments, those are not getting sprayed with pesticides. Oh, that was the word I was trying to think of before. They're not getting sprayed with pesticides accidentally because nobody is flying over the property in urban centers and spraying. So the flowers that are grown by people in cities, and everybody, if you can, please do, those tend to be safer for the little buggies. I did not know that until I learned it from Barbara Edelman, and the boy has that stuck in my mind for 10 years. Oh my gosh, it has been 10 years. Wow. Time flies, I tell you what. All right, and that is everything I've got for you for today. Now, let's talk a little bit about Cranford. So, rehashing last week, chapter 5. Last week was the chapter where we got to read all of Miss Matty's letters from her family, from her childhood. So Miss Matty and Mary Smith had read all of those letters together, and it was very sad. And it ended on the poor Peter note, and that was the end of the chapter. Well, today we are going to learn about poor Peter, and I'm just going to give a warning now, and I'm going to give a warning again later. Nothing that I say in my prehash of the chapters, we're rehashing chapter 5, prehashing chapter 6. Nothing I say in my prehash notes is going to cause anybody a problem, I don't think. However, I did want to give everybody kind of a heads up or trigger warning that there is abuse of a teenage boy in this story. Obviously, it isn't crossing into real taboo topics, but corporal punishment was much more of a thing back then than it is now. And so if that upsets you quite a lot, like I know after Aaron was born, I could not even watch like AT&T commercials. If there was a young man, like teenage boy who had to call home for his mother, I would burst into tears. This goes beyond that. But yeah, I did want to make sure, and I will remind you again before we listen to the chapter, that if that's going to upset you, this is when you can skip and you'll pick up what you need as we go along through the book. So that's where chapter 5 ended. That's where chapter 6 is going to begin. And they're going to repeat a line that was kind of a weird one from chapter 5. And that was the bonus Bernardus non video omnia. That's the blessed Bernard does not see everything, or even the wisest man, blessed Bernard, can be wrong sometimes. That gets repeated at the very, very beginning of this chapter. So that's just a reminder. That's what it means, and it's getting used the same way. Hoaxing, Hoax, exactly what you think it is, hoaxing. That word was slang when it first came into usage around 1796. So it's a pretty recent word. But by 1820, 20 years later, it was already in common usage. It was common parlance at the time. So by 1840, 1850, when this book is written about and when it is being written, hoaxing somebody was no longer slang. It really wasn't like going to make people look askance at you. And it means exactly what you think. It's playing a trick on somebody else. We would use pranking now. They use hoaxing. St. James's Chronicle. I had never heard of this, and I'm really surprised that it didn't at least come up on my radar when I was doing research for the Brontes. But the St. James's Chronicle was something that started being published under a different name in 1761. It was called The English Churchman, and it had been way back a Catholic publication. But by the time we get to where we are now, it had been, the whole shebang had been purchased and was Anglicanized. So it was like a 3 times a week newspaper for people in the clergy and their families. So it had a reputation, and I'm quoting here, for being, quote, robustly reformed and Protestant evangelical, as the formularies of the Church of England teach. And that I'm getting off of a piece of research that was posted on the Wikipedia page. I am linking out to the Library of Congress page as well as the Wikipedia page, because this is listed in the American Library of Congress, which I thought was kind of cool. And since the website is still up, I thought, why not celebrate that? So rhododendrons get mentioned because there was actually a rhododendron thing that occurred right around the time that this book is taking place and was being written. There was a botanist, Sir Joseph Hooker, who brought exotic species or exotic rhododendrons back from his travels in the Himalayas. And it was very exciting news. And apparently, There is or was a place in Kew Gardens called the Rhododendron Dell, and it caused quite a stir, and everybody was very excited about it. So new rhododendrons aren't just new to the neighborhood. That would be no, actually really quite new to the country. I don't know if that's still a thing in Kew Gardens. Please let me know. I wanna find out. You can write heather@craftlit.com or call 1-206-350-1642. Operators are waiting. And or if you're out of the continental United States, you might want to use speakpipe.com/craftlit and leave us a message there about this rhododendron dell. It sounds lovely. That's great. Along with rhododendrons, you're going to hear a reference to lilies of the field. This is not a reference to actual lilies in an actual field. This is a reference to Matthew chapter 6, verses 28 and 29. Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, nor do they sow, nor do they spin. Sorry. Of course, they don't sow. They're growing. They're beautiful. They're doing fine. They're not type A personalities. So it's just a little reference to that as kind of a sideline I didn't want you to get. If you weren't familiar with that phrase from the book of Matthew, I didn't want you to think, why is she talking about lilies in a field? They're talking about the front yard. Queen Esther and King Ahasuerus. Okay, I'm going to sum up as best I can. The book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't include the name of God. It doesn't talk about God at all. I mean, it's not that there's no Adonai in it. There is no mention of God at all. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of really awesome coinkydinks that are happening in here, but God is not mentioned. It's also a Megillah. And I can't remember. I think there are only 5 Megillot, that's plural. I think there are only 5 of those that are included in what we think of now as the complete Bible. And you've probably seen a Torah scroll, even if you aren't Jewish, at some point in your life, where it's 2 big rolled tubes on either end, and then they're pulled apart from each other, and then the text that you're reading that week, because it goes through the Torah over the course of a year, you rotate through the whole thing. So the beginning and end of year, one of those rolls is very small and the other is very big. Torah scroll, 2 posts holding big heavy book. Megillah, 1 pole with the scroll rolled around it. Thus, the whole Megillah is the whole text wrapped around the wooden pole, that handle thing that it's onto. Just an interesting sideline, I thought. But the book of Esther talks about King Ahasuerus, who is kind of a punk. He has a beautiful queen, Queen Vashti. He gets drunk one night at a party that he's throwing and says, you know what? I want my queen to come out here and show off how lovely she is. Huh. You can imagine that does not go over well. Vashti doesn't like being ordered around, and she doesn't like being told to parade around for other people's enjoyment. She's the queen after all. So she says no. He says, bye. I'm going to get my new wife. Esther is very, very beautiful. He picks her. She happens to be Jewish. She hides that fact from him because that wouldn't fly. And because the Jews are having a little trouble right now. This is after the Babylonian exile. This is taking place in Persia. This is not a group of people that went back to Israel. And life's rough. I know when you talk about Jewish history, that kind of seems like, well, duh. But it was at this time. So Esther thinks, okay, maybe I can use my relationship with the king as leverage to help my people. Her uncle Mordecai is a good dude, and the king has a bad dude. He has a Jafar. He has an evil vizier named Haman. And I should be using it on Purim You use a grogger, which is like a rattle. You're supposed to blot out the name of Haman. Boo. Because he is such a bad guy. And on Purim, one of the things that you are supposed to do is read the entire Megillah, the whole Megillah, the entire book of Esther out loud at your Purim parties for lots of reasons. But Haman, bad guy, plots against the king. Mordecai hears the plotting. The people who are going to be carrying out the plot are talking about it out on the street. He warns Esther. Esther saves the king's life. Everybody's happy. Haman was the one who was the ringleader to this whole plot. And there are other pieces of intrigue that happen there. But ultimately, Mordecai and Esther win. Haman loses. The end. So that being the whole Megillah, the thing that I thought was interesting is Miss Matty is going to refer to her mother and father as Queen Esther and King Ahasuerus. She's referring to Queen Esther because she thinks her mother is so beautiful. And I think also incorruptible and a very good soul. But I also think that in this chapter, the word heroic, like quietly heroic, probably fits. Thus, the Esther connection. The fact that she's mentioning Ahasuerus at all in relationship to her father does make me think that on some level, she is thinking kind of a dope and not always such a good guy. And Elizabeth Gaskell putting this in there was not accidental. It's not just, oh, Esther's supposed to be pretty. I think there's several layers of going on here. There's going to be one other letter that gets read in today's chapter. It's completely separate from the letters that we read last week. It is going to include a reference to a person called Dor, D-O-R. The only thing I could figure out was that this is probably a pet name for Deborah. That's my best guess. It makes sense in place. So don't get thrown by that, because the first couple times I was reading, I was, what? Who is the Door? I got nothing. To time things out about poor Peter's life, there's a reference to there being no overland route to India. That lets us know a little bit more closely when he would have gone. The overland route via the Red Sea was opened in the late 1830s. The only other way to get to India, ships would have to go down around the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, until the Suez Canal was built and opened in 1869. So I think that opens after Elizabeth Gaskell has passed on. That's the reference to no overland route. You would have had to go by boat. Woof. There's a reference to soft white India shawls. And if you did North and South with me, you may remember the shawls that starts the whole book. The description of the shawls, beautiful. And I think I've mentioned a few times that when we went to visit Mrs. Gaskell's home, there are some prominently displayed Indian muslin shawls. The other kind of fabric that they may have been made of was cashmere. And you can imagine how very, very, very soft, supple, beautiful these would have been. Many of them were actually embroidered too. So yeah, so this would have been beautiful. Miss Matty also mentions some great war in India. She's like, yeah, stuff happened, blah, 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 things, blah, 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 war. She's probably talking about the first Burmese war, which was 1824 to 1826. This is when Britain declared war on Burma because Burma threatened territory in India. So, yeah. It's very funny doing this book at the same time as I'm doing Moby Dick, because they're written at the same time, right? So there are really interesting little crossovers between the two books. Like Melville is really deeply anti-colonial. So he would not have been pleased with what the British were doing in India at all. And so my Melville-related hackles go up when I read about things like this. Anyway, we are going to read the chapter now. Just a reminder, again, if you do not want to hear anything about a young man in his late teens being abused by his father, skip it. No, I can just put a summary. I'll put a summary in the show notes, and you can just read that, and I'll be oblique. And then you can pop back in and join us for the end of today's post-chapter talk. So if you are listening to your own version, or if you are going to ditch listening to this chapter and come back afterwards, you can fast wind to 1 hour, 25 seconds. All right, here we go. Listening to Noel Badrian reading us Chapter 6 of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. Here we go.
Chapter 6 of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. Poor Peter. Poor Peter's career lay before him, rather pleasantly mapped out by kind friends, but bonus Bernardus non videt omnia in this map too. He was to win honours at Shrewsbury School and carry them thick to Cambridge, and after that a living awaited him, the gift of his godfather, Sir Peter Arley. Poor Peter, his lot in life was very different to what his friends had hoped and planned. Miss Matty told me all about it, and I think it was a relief to her when she had done so. He was the darling of his mother, who seemed to dote on all her children, though she was, perhaps, a little afraid of Deborah's superior acquirements. Deborah was the favourite of her father, and when Peter disappointed him, she became his pride. The sole honour Peter brought away from Shrewsbury was the reputation of being the best good fellow that ever was, and of being the captain of the school in the art of practical joking. His father was disappointed, but set about remedying the matter in a manly way. He could not afford to send Peter to read with any tutor, but he could read with him himself. And Miss Matty told me much of the awful preparations in the way of dictionaries and lexicons that were made in her father's study the morning Peter began. "My poor mother," said she, "I remember how she used to stand in the hall, just near enough the study door to catch the tone of my father's voice. I could tell in a moment if all was going right by her face. And it did go right for a long time." "What went wrong at last?" said I. "That tiresome Latin, I dare say?" No, it was not the Latin. Peter was in high favour with my father, for he worked up well for him. But he seemed to think that the Cranford people might be joked about and made fun of, and they did not like it. Nobody does. He was always hoaxing them. Hoaxing is not a pretty word, my dear, and I hope you won't tell your father I used it, for I should not like him to think that I was not choice in my language, after living with such a woman as Deborah. And be sure you never use it yourself. I don't know how it slipped out of my mouth, except it was that I was thinking of poor Peter, and it was always his expression. But he was a very gentlemanly boy in many things. He was like Captain Brown in always being ready to help any old person or a child. Still, he did like joking and making fun, and he seemed to think the old ladies in Cranford would believe anything. There were many old ladies living here then. We are principally ladies now, I know, but we are not so old as the ladies used to be when I was a girl. I could laugh to think of some of Peter's jokes. No, my dear, I won't tell you of them, because they might not shock you as they ought to do, and they were very shocking. He even took in my father once by dressing himself up as a lady that was passing through the town and wished to see the rector of Cranford, who had published that admirable assize sermon. Peter said he was awfully frightened himself when he saw how my father took it all in, and even offered to copy out all his Napoleon Bonaparte sermons for her, him, I mean. No, her, for Peter was a lady then. He told me he was more terrified than he ever was before all the time my father was speaking. He did not think my father would have believed him, and yet if he had not, it would have been a sad thing for Peter. As it was, He was none too glad of it, for my father kept him hard at work copying out all those 12 Bonaparte sermons for the lady. That was for Peter himself, you know. He was the lady. And once when he wanted to go fishing, Peter said, "Confound the woman." Very bad language, my dear, but Peter was not always so guarded as he should have been. My father was so angry with him it nearly frightened me out of my wits, and yet I could hardly keep from laughing at the little curtsies Peter kept making, quite slyly, whenever my father spoke of the lady's excellent taste and sound discrimination. "Did Miss Jenkins know of these tricks?" said I. "Oh, no, Deborah would have been too much shocked. No, no one knew but me. I wish I had always known of Peter's plans, but sometimes he did not tell me. He used to say the old ladies in the town wanted something to talk about, but I don't think they did. They had the St. James's Chronicle 3 times a week, just as we have now, and we have plenty to say. And I remember the clacking noise there always was when some of the ladies got together. But probably schoolboys talk more than ladies. At last there was a terrible, sad thing happened. Miss Matty got up, went to the door, and opened it. No one was there. She rang the bell for Martha, and when Martha came, her mistress told her to go for eggs to a farm at the other end of the town. "I will lock the door after you, Martha. You're not afraid to go, are you?" "No, ma'am, not at all. Jem Hearn will only be too proud to go with me." Miss Matty drew herself up, and as soon as we were alone, she wished that Martha had more maidenly reserve. "We'll put out the candle, my dear. We can talk just as well by firelight, you know. There. Well, you see, Deborah had gone from home for a fortnight or so. It was a very still, quiet day, I remember, overhead, and the lilacs were all in flower, so I suppose it was spring. My father had gone out to see some sick people in the parish. I recollect seeing him leave the house with his wig and shovel hat and cane. What possessed our poor Peter, I don't know. He had the sweetest temper, and yet he always seemed to like to plague Deborah. She never laughed at his jokes, and thought him ungenteel and not careful enough about improving his mind, and that vexed him. Well, he went to her room, it seems, and dressed himself in her old gown and shawl and bonnet, just the things she was used to wear in Cranford and was known by everywhere. And he made the pillow into a little— "You are sure you locked the door, my dear, for I should not like anyone to hear." Into a little baby, with white long clothes. It was only, as he told me afterwards, to make something to talk about in the town. He never thought of it as affecting Deborah. And he went and walked up and down in the Filbert Walk, just half hidden by the rails and half seen. And he cuddled his pillow just like a baby, and talked to it all the nonsense people do. Oh dear, and my father came stepping stately up the street, as he always did, and what should he see but a little black crowd of people, I dare say as many as 20, all peeping through his garden rails. So he thought, at first, they were only looking at a new rhododendron that was in full bloom, and that he was very proud of, and he walked slower, that they might have more time to admire. And he wondered if he could make out a sermon from the occasion, and thought, perhaps, there was some relation between the rhododendrons and the lilies of the field. My poor father! When he came nearer, he began to wonder that they did not see him. But their heads were all so close together, peeping and peeping. My father was amongst them, meaning, he said, to ask them to walk into the garden with him and admire the beautiful vegetable production, when— oh, my dear, I tremble to think of it. He looked through the rails himself and saw— I don't know what he thought he saw, but old Clare told me his face went quite grey-white with anger, and his eyes blazed out under his frowning black brows, and he spoke out, oh, so terribly, and bade them all stop where they were, not one of them to go, not one to stir a step, and swift as light he was in at the garden door and down the Filbert walk, and seized hold of poor Peter, and tore his clothes off his back, bonnet, shawl, gown, and all, and threw the pillow among the people over the railings. And then he was very, very angry indeed, and before all the people he lifted up his cane and flogged Peter. My dear, that boy's tricks, on that sunny day when all seemed going straight and well, broke my mother's heart and changed my father for life. It did indeed. Old Clare said Peter looked as white as my father and stood as still as a statue to be flogged, and my father struck hard. When my father stopped to take breath, Peter said, "Have you done enough, sir?" quite hoarsely and still standing quite quiet. I don't know what my father said, or if he said anything, but old Clare said Peter turned to where the people outside the railings were, and made them a low bow, as grand and as grave as any gentleman, and then walked slowly into the house. I was in the storeroom helping my mother to make cowslip wine. I cannot abide the wine now, nor the scent of the flowers. They turn me sick and faint, as they did that day, when Peter came in, looking as haughty as any man, indeed, looking like a man, not like a boy. "Mother," he said, "I am come to say God bless you forever." I saw his lips quiver as he spoke, and I think he durst not say anything more loving, for the purpose that was in his heart. She looked at him rather frightened and wondering, and asked him what was to do. He did not smile or speak, but he put his arms round her and kissed her as if he did not know how to leave off, and before she could speak again, he was gone. We talked it over and could not understand it, and she bade me go and seek my father and ask what it was all about. I found him walking up and down, looking very highly displeased. "Tell your mother I have flogged Peter, and that he richly deserved it." I durst not ask any more questions. When I told my mother, she sat down quite faint for a minute. I remember a few days after, I saw the poor withered cowslip flowers thrown out to the leaf-heap to decay and die there. There was no making of cowslip wine that year at the rectory, nor, indeed, ever after. Presently my mother went to my father. I know I thought of Queen Esther and King Ahasuerus, for my mother was very pretty and delicate-looking, and my father looked as terrible as King Ahasuerus. Some time after they came out again, and then my mother told me what had happened, and that she was going up to Peter's room at my father's desire, though she was not to tell Peter this, to talk the matter over with him. But no Peter was there. We looked over the house. No Peter was there. Even my father, who had not liked to join in the search at first, helped us before long. The rectory was a very old house, steps up into a room, steps down into a room, all through. At first my mother went calling low and soft as if to reassure the poor boy, "Peter, Peter dear, it's only me." But by and by, as the servants came back from the errands my father had sent them in different directions to find where Peter was, as we found he was not in the garden nor the hayloft nor anywhere about, my mother's cry grew louder and wilder, "Peter, Peter, my darling, where are you?" For then she felt and understood that that long kiss meant some sad kind of goodbye. The afternoon went on, my mother never resting, but seeking again and again in every possible place that had been looked into 20 times before, nay, that she had looked into over and over again herself. My father sat with his head in his hands, not speaking except when his messengers came in, bringing no tidings. Then he lifted up his face, so strong and sad, and told them to go again, in some new direction. My mother kept passing from room to room, in and out of the house, moving noiselessly but never ceasing. Neither she nor my father durst leave the house, which was the meeting place for all the messengers. At last, and it was nearly dark, my father rose up. He took hold of my mother's arm as she came in with wild, sad pace through one door and quickly towards another. She started at the touch of his hand, for she had forgotten all in the world but Peter. "Molly," said he, "I did not think all this would happen." He looked into her face for comfort. Her poor face, all wild and white, for neither she nor my father had dared to acknowledge, much less act upon, the terror that was in their hearts, lest Peter should have made away with himself. My father saw no conscious look in his wife's hot, dreary eyes, and he missed the sympathy that she had always been ready to give him, strong man as he was, and at the dumb despair in her face his tears began to flow. But when she saw this, a gentle sorrow came over her countenance, and she said, "Dearest John, don't cry. Come with me and we'll find him," almost as cheerfully as if she knew where he was. And she took my father's great hand in her little soft one, and led him along, the tears dropping as he walked on that same unceasing, weary walk from room to room, through house and garden. Oh, how I wished for Deborah! I had no time for crying, for now all seemed to depend on me. I wrote for Deborah to come home. I sent a message privately to that same Mr. Holbrook's house. Poor Mr. Holbrook, you know who I mean. I don't mean I sent a message to him, but I sent one that I could trust to know if Peter was at his house. For at one time Mr. Holbrook was an occasional visitor at the rectory. You know he was Miss Pole's cousin, and he had been very kind to Peter and taught him how to fish. He was very kind to everybody, and I thought Peter might have gone off there. But Mr. Holbrook was from home, and Peter had never been seen. It was night now, but the doors were all wide open, and my father and mother walked on and on. It was more than an hour since he had joined her, and I don't believe that they had ever spoken all that time. I was getting the parlour fire lighted, and one of the servants was preparing tea, for I wanted them to have something to eat and drink, and warm them, when old Clare asked to speak to me. "I have borrowed the nets from the weir, Miss Matty. Shall we drag the ponds tonight, or wait for the morning?" I remember staring in his face to gather his meaning, and when I did, laughed out loud. The horror of that new thought, our bright darling Peter, cold and stark and dead. I remember the ring of my own laugh now. The next day Deborah was at home, before I was myself again. She would not have been so weak as to give way as I had done. But my screams, my horrible laughter had ended in crying, had roused my sweet dear mother, whose poor wandering wits were called back and collected as soon as a child needed her care. She and Deborah sat by my bedside. I knew by the looks of each that there had been no news of Peter, no awful, ghastly news, which was what I most had dreaded in my dull state between sleeping and waking. The same result of all the searching had brought something of the same relief to my mother, to whom, I am sure, the thought that Peter might even then be hanging dead in some of the familiar home places had caused that never-ending walk of yesterday. Her soft eyes never were the same again after that. They had always a restless, craving look, as if seeking for what they could not find. Oh, it was an awful time, coming down like a thunderbolt on the still sunny day when the lilacs were all in bloom. "Where was Mr. Peter?" said I. He had made his way to Liverpool, and there was war then, and some of the king's ships lay off the mouth of the Mersey, and they were only too glad to have a fine likely boy such as him, 5'9" he was, come to offer himself. The captain wrote to my father, and Peter wrote to my mother. Stay, those letters will be somewhere here. We lighted the candle, and found the captain's letter, and Peter's too. And we also found a little simple begging letter from Mrs. Jenkins to Peter, addressed to him at the house of an old schoolfellow, whither she fancied he might have gone. They had returned it unopened, and unopened it had remained ever since, having been inadvertently put by among the other letters of that time. This is it. My dearest Peter, you did not think we should be so sorry as we are, I know, or you would never have gone away. You are too good. Your father sits and sighs till my heart aches to hear him. He cannot hold up his head for grief, and yet he only did what he thought was right. Perhaps he has been too severe, and perhaps I have not been kind enough. But God knows how we love you, my dear only boy. Don looks sorry you are gone. Come back and make us happy, who love you so much. I know you will come back. But Peter did not come back. That spring day was the last time he ever saw his mother's face. The writer of the letter, the last, the only person who had ever seen what was written in it, was dead long ago, and I, a stranger, not born at the time when this occurrence took place, was the one to open it. The captain's letter summoned the father and mother to Liverpool instantly if they wished to see their boy, and by some of the wild chances of life, the captain's letter had been detained somewhere, somehow. Miss Matty went on, and it was race time, and all the post-horses at Cranford were gone to the races. But my father and mother set off in our own gig, and oh, my dear, they were too late. The ship was gone. And now read Peter's letter to my mother. It was full of love and sorrow and pride in his new profession, and a sore sense of his disgrace in the eyes of the people at Cranford, but ending with a passionate entreaty that she would come and see him before he left the Mersey. Mother, we may go into battle, I hope we shall, and lick those French, but I must see you again before that time. And she was too late, said Miss Matty, too late. We sat in silence, pondering on the full meaning of those sad, sad words. At length I asked Miss Matty to tell me how her mother bore it. Oh, she said, she was patience itself. She had never been strong, and this weakened her terribly. My father used to sit looking at her, far more sad than she was. He seemed as if he could look at nothing else when she was by, and he was so humble, so very gentle now. He would, perhaps, speak in his old way, laying down the law, as it were, and then, in a minute or two, he would come round and put his hand on our shoulders, and ask us in a low voice if he had said anything to hurt us. I did not wonder at his speaking so to Deborah, for she was so clever, but I could not bear to hear him talking so to me. But you see, he saw what we did not, that it was killing my mother, yes, killing her. Put out the candle, my dear. I can talk better in the dark. For she was but a frail woman, and ill-fitted to stand the fright and shock she had gone through, and she would smile at him and comfort him, not in words, but in her looks and tones, which were always cheerful when he was there. And she would speak of how she thought Peter stood a good chance of being admiral very soon. He was so brave and clever, and how she thought of seeing him in his navy uniform, and what sort of hats admirals wore, and how much more fit he was to be a sailor than a clergyman, and all in that way, just to make my father think she was quite glad of what came of that unlucky morning's work, and the flogging which was always in his mind, as we all knew. But oh, my dear, the bitter, bitter crying she had when she was alone. And at last, as she grew weaker, she could not keep her tears in when Deborah or me was by, and would give us message after message for Peter. His ship had gone to the Mediterranean or somewhere down there, and then he was ordered off to India, and there was no overland route then. But she still said that no one knew where their death lay in wait, and that we were not to think hers was near. We did not think it, but we knew it as we saw her fading away. Well, my dear, it's very foolish of me, I know, when in all likelihood I am so near seeing her again. And only think, love, the very day after her death. for she did not live quite a 12-month after Peter went away. The very day after came a parcel for her from India, from her poor boy. It was a large, soft, white India shawl, with just a little narrow border all round, just what my mother would have liked. We thought it might rouse my father, for he had sat with her hand in his all night long. So Deborah took it in to him, and Peter's letter to her and all. At first he took no notice, and we tried to make a kind of light, careless talk about the shawl, opening it out and admiring it. Then suddenly he got up and spoke. "She shall be buried in it," he said. "Peter shall have that comfort," and she would have liked it. Well, perhaps it was not reasonable, but what could we do or say? One gives people in grief their own way. He took it up and felt it. It is just such a shawl as she wished for when she was married, and her mother did not give it her. I did not know of it till after, or she should have had it, she should. But she shall have it now. My mother looked so lovely in her death. She was always pretty, and now she looked fair and waxen and young, younger than Deborah, as she stood trembling and shivering by her. We decked her in the long soft folds. She lay smiling, as if pleased, and people came, all Cranford came, to beg to see her, for they had loved her dearly, as well they might. And the countrywomen brought posies. Old Clare's wife brought some white violets, and begged they might lie on her breast. Deborah said to me the day of my mother's funeral that if she had 100 offers she never would marry and leave my father. It was not very likely she would have so many. I don't know that she had one, but it was not less to her credit to say so. She was such a daughter to my father as I think there never was before or since. His eyes failed him, and she read book after book, and wrote and copied, and was always at his service in any parish business. She could do many more things than my poor mother could, and she even once wrote a letter to the bishop for my father. But he missed my mother sorely. The whole parish noticed it. Not that he was less active, I think he was more so, and more patient in helping everyone. I did all I could to set Deborah at liberty to be with him, for I knew I was good for little, and that my best work in the world was to do odd jobs quietly and set others at liberty. But my father was a changed man. Did Mr. Peter ever come home? Yes, once. He came home a lieutenant. He did not get to be admiral. And he and my father were such friends. My father took him into every house in the parish. He was so proud of him. He never walked out without Peter's arm to lean upon. Deborah used to smile. I don't think we ever laughed again after my mother's death, and say she was quite put in a corner. Not but what my father always wanted her when there was letter writing or reading to be done or anything to be settled. And then, said I, after a pause, then Peter went to sea again, and by my father died, blessing us both and thanking Deborah for all she had been to him. And, of course, our circumstances were changed, and instead of living at the rectory and keeping 3 maids and a man, we had to come to this small house and be content with a servant of all work. But as Deborah used to say, we have always lived genteelly, even if circumstances have compelled us to simplicity. Poor Deborah. And Mr. Peter? Asked I. Oh, there was some great war in India, I forget what they call it, and we have never heard of Peter since then. I believe he is dead myself, and it sometimes fidgets me that we have never put on mourning for him. And then again, when I sit by myself and all the house is still, I think I hear his step coming up the street, and my heart begins to flutter and beat. But the sound always goes past, and Peter never comes. That's Martha back? No, I'll go, my dear. I can always find my way in the dark, you know. and a blow of fresh air at the door will do my head good, and it's rather got a trick of aching." So she pattered off. I had lighted the candle to give the room a cheerful appearance against her return. "Was it, Martha?" asked I. "Yes, and I am rather uncomfortable, for I heard such a strange noise just as I was opening the door." "Where?" I asked, for her eyes were round with affright. "In the street, just outside. It sounded like—" "Talking?" I put in, as she hesitated a little. "No, kissing." End of chapter 6.
All right. So this week, we end with kissing. Or at least that's what we think it. We're pretty sure, right? We're pretty darn sure Martha is having some fun, which is fine. Miss Matty doesn't want to stop her, but Miss Matty also cares about propriety and things like that, so she's a little aghast. I loved that when she was about to tell the story of poor Peter, she sends Martha out to go all the way across town. I love that she locks the door, like anybody's gonna come in who might possibly overhear, and then to blow the candle out so she can tell the story in the dark. I just love Miss Matty. I mean, characterization-wise, there is so much going on with this one woman. It's it's astounding. There's so much subtle information that Gaskell transmits about Miss Matty. It's just a joy getting to know her. I also really, really loved Miss Matty when she was telling the story to Mary Smith, and she talks about how Peter liked to joke and make fun, and he seemed to think that the old ladies in Cranford would believe anything. And then she stops and corrects herself. There were many old ladies living here then. We are principally ladies now, I know, but we are not so old as the ladies used to be when I was a girl. And I just thought, oh, I know exactly what what you feel like, Miss Matty. I remember when my grandmother was my age. She was much older than I am. Honestly, I think in my case, it was probably the hairstyle that did it. But yeah, I do I do feel like Miss Matty, and I'm sure that my children will feel the same about me. Oh, dear. I really have to say I loved that Peter's punishment, the first time we hear about him hoaxing his father, is that he's the one who has to copy out all of the anti-Bonaparte sermons for this woman. Now, I will tell you, I have seen on the web more than a couple of times, not just on the web, but in like scholarly papers that were turned in as part of master's theses or PhDs. I've seen people referring to Peter as a quote unquote cross-dresser, which is no longer a term in vogue, and more recently of being trans. I think there is exactly zero support for this. I think if you're American, maybe the fact that he is convincingly dressing up and selling himself as a woman for the purpose of a prank might be a little weird for Americans. But if you think of like, and I'm speaking just to Americans right now, Americans, if you think back for a moment to Benny Hill or Monty Python, men dressing up in women's clothes to prank you in England, this is not news. It's it's just not. And I think to make this assumption that Peter doing this has something to do with his gender identity it's taken it a little too far. It's Jack and Jilling it just a little bit too much. Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there, that I am well aware of some of the, not so much gender issues, but the non-cis het relationships in Moby Dick. This is not one of them. It's just not. I also loved the way Miss Matty spoke about them trying to find Peter and all the different places that they were going to and kind of digging into and trying to figure out, is he here? Is he there? That they're ready to drag the pond for his body, which I thought Miss Matty's reaction to was both heartbreaking and also, well, yeah, to start by laughing and then going into kind of almost hysterical crying. That makes a lot of sense to me. The other thing that's it's so barely stated that she found a way to write to someone at Mr. Holbrook's, not him, because that would be crossing a line in either direction. Either she likes Mr. Holbrook, but they haven't been formally courting, or this is after the courting and it would be inappropriate for her to contact Mr. Holbrook. Either way, the fact that Mr. Holbrook and Peter had been friends and that Peter would go over and hang out is lovely. And also, again, just heartbreaking because Holbrook liked Peter too, clearly. And how lovely it would have been if he had married Miss Matty and could have actually been a relative of Peter. And yeah, that made me sad. Like melancholy sad, like good sad. The way that like sliding doors. Like, well, it could have been that, but nope. And then the last thing I wanted to ask listeners in the UK, there's a mention that the lilacs were in bloom. Now, lilacs in the United States, where I am, so I'm zone 7A in Pennsylvania, our lilacs bloom and also bloomed in Croton-on-Hudson. We had a lilac tree in our front yard there. They always came out, the flowers came out and bloomed between my birthday, May 5th, and whatever day was the American Mother's Day, second Sunday in May? Is that the same timing for y'all? I don't know, but it does let us know when in the story all of this happened, and how sad to have such a beautiful flowering plant and a beautiful scent be associated with such a sad time. Boy, I didn't think I was going to end on a downer, but yeah, there it is. All right. Oh, actually, there is one more thing. So on the Discord server, there was a conversation. Alix picked up that in chapter 2 of Cranford, there was a line talking about sending Captain Brown to Coventry. And so we did some digging. And that expression probably, and if my research has led me astray, please let me know. It probably dates back to the 1640s, to the English Civil War, because royalist prisoners of war, people who supported King Charles I, were sent to a strongly parliamentarian town of Coventry, where the local citizens were ordered not to speak to them. So it's not just giving somebody the cold shoulder, it's like almost like an exile. Like you're being sent down and you will be given the silent treatment to the nth degree. So Coventry became associated with isolation and the silent treatment in that respect. And then Alix wrote and said that France had its own geographical word of social punishment. And this is a quote: partial French equivalent is limoger, removing or demoting someone from a high position, which is derived from Limoges, the city in central France to which generals deemed incompetent were sent to during World War I. Wow. Okay. So if you get sent to Limoges, if you are a limoger, bad news for you, incompetence. If you get sent down to Coventry, it's because you're being given the silent treatment for being a bad kid. So Peter could have been sent to Coventry, but instead ran to India. Woof. Don't forget, please send us your crafty videos, any videos you want to share of you doing all sorts of fabulous crafty stuff. We will put information on the screen and in the show notes as well for your shop, your charity, your anything you want to bring people's attention to, your own podcast, whatever, let us know. And there's a link in the show notes for you to be able to go to the Google form and give us both your video and the text that you want on the screen and in the show notes, the URLs and the text you want. And that's it. All right. Have a great week. I will talk to you soon. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Be safe. Have a good one. Bye. Hey, YouTube. I have a special message for you. This is not going out on the audio part of the podcast. You may have noticed that we set our episodes of CraftLit up so that there's no mid-video interruptions. I don't tell you to smash that like button all the time or anything like that. It breaks the flow of the episode, and I really hate it when people do that. I understand why they do it, but it doesn't make my theatrical spirit feel any better about things. So here's the deal. If you like not being harangued to like and subscribe, then please like and subscribe now. And share these episodes too. That is how I get to keep making more videos like this for you, and how I will be able to continue doing it far into the future. If you are new to CraftLit and you want to know how to get more books, there is a link on the screen now to our library of books. And if you're curious about other ways to support the video version specifically, or the podcast version, the audio only version as well, here's a different link for that as well. Last thing. Audio annotated classic books are not a sexy sell. It's not even easy to give an elevator pitch for what CraftLit is. I know. I personally, as a public school teacher and an introvert, I hate feeling like a salesperson. I am not good at it. It makes me uncomfortable. Please don't make me do it. So, the most helpful thing that you can do for this show, pick a book, maybe like Northanger Abbey. It's on YouTube. There's no video add-ons, but it's an easy start. It's easy to listen to. It's funny. Grab a friend or two, or maybe go to your book club and listen to the episodes with them. Or if you do it with a book club, just say, okay, everybody listen to this book for the next time that we meet. That way, you've got this great jumping off point for discussing the book, for a real deep discussion about the book, because you will have gotten all the easy notes out of the way with CraftLit. It's a way to fast track your book group into real, meaningful discussions of a text. And you'll all start from the same point, which makes it also easier. And boy, sharing the show with people like that helps more than anything else. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for liking and subscribing and commenting and all the things that makes the algorithm happy. And yeah, thanks. I really, really, really appreciate it. It is what will allow us to keep doing this for many years to come. All right, you take care of yourself. Have a great one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.